JavaScript promises can be one of the more confusing topics in the language. Let's explain them. JavaScript is single-threaded, meaning it can only run a single piece of code at a time. To get around this shortcoming, promises were introduced to the language in ES6. Promises allow JavaScript to handle asynchronous code, meaning running multiple pieces of code at the same time. A promise is an object that represents the eventual completion or failure of an asynchronous operation and its resulting value. There are three possible states of a promise: pending, fulfilled, or rejected, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. For now, let's use an analogy by Kyle Simpson to better solidify the concept. You can think of a promise as being like a meal ticket at a fast food restaurant. You order your meal, pay the clerk, and they hand you a receipt with a number on it. You can think about this receipt as a promise, saying that eventually you will receive your meal. When your meal is made, the clerk calls your number, you hand him your receipt, and he gives you your meal. Now, of course, there's another option. The clerk could call your number and inform you that they were all out of the milkshakes you ordered. In other words, the promise failed. Promises in JavaScript work the same way. You call a function and receive a promise in return. When the function is done, it resolves the promise and passes you the result, whether it's a success or a failure. Now, if none of that made any sense, don't worry. Let's actually show you how it works in code. Let's create a promise. To do that, we write new promise like this. A promise takes two actions, a resolve and a reject. Then inside the body of the function, we can perform some action. For us, we'll just add a contrived if-else statement to demonstrate. Now that we have our promise, let's call it. In order to do that, we need to introduce the then method, which takes a function as an argument, and that function gets executed once the promise is settled. If we run this, we see our promise is resolved. But if we change the num's value, now num doesn't meet the condition, and the promise is rejected. The great thing about this syntax is that we can chain as many then methods onto each other as we want. A then will always return a promise. One issue we might run into is error handling, and for this, JavaScript provides the catch method. Like then, catch can be chained on to the end of our then method, and it will handle any errors that spring up on any of the then methods above it. Alright, so we know how to create promises, but let's take a look at a more real-world use case. For this, we'll use the fetch keyword, which is built into JavaScript and allows us to make calls to outside URLs. Here we're making a call to an outside API, which if successful, will return some users. Fetch returns a promise, and then we can handle the data as we see fit. We call the first then method, passing in our function and a response argument. Then inside that function, we transform that data to an object using the .json method. Next, we chain on another then method, passing in a function and the data returned from the response.json call. Inside that function, we'll just log the data to the console like so. Finally, let's add a catch to the end to handle any errors that might spring up. Alright, so now if we run this, we get back the data from the call we made to the URL. But if for some reason that data doesn't come back, or we make a call to the wrong URL, our catch method will handle that. And that is how promises work in JavaScript.